All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If you don't know where you're at, you are at a webinar with me. My name is Monique Giggy. I'm the Vice President of Singularity University Ventures and the man who absolutely needs no introduction, Mr. Peter Diamandis, here talking to you about becoming a billion scale startup. So welcome, everybody.
Hey, Monique.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm doing really good. So I thought I'd take you all through a few slides, not too long before we get into the topics that we've outlined, and then from there, give you an opportunity to talk about, learn how to register for GSP if you're interested and you're an entrepreneur, and that'll be about it. So it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, if I could,
Yeah.
super excited about the re-engineering of the Singularity University GSP. And if you're here for this webinar to learn, is it the right thing for you? And why you should be thinking about how do you impact the lives of a billion people, this is the right webinar for you, right? If you've got something that is you think a great idea, you've got a semblance of the team and a company going, but you really want to know how to, in this world of rapidly exponentially accelerating change, how do you scale globally? That's what the program that Monique has put together is all about. And so excited to join in and discuss that, answer your questions.
Yeah, and for anybody who doesn't know, this is Peter's program, actually. I mean, it's probably the biggest honor that I have to get to work and literally stand on the shoulders of giants because, I actually am an alumnus of this program. This is actually me. This is my class. So I was part of GSP in 2014. You can see Peter there in the middle in the blue shirt, and then there's me. And so when I had the opportunity to kind of take my mission forward in life after all of the transformative experience I had from GSP and redesign and sort of relaunch this program, I just jumped at it. So, the first thing that you should know about GSP, and Peter, chime in at any point in time, is that it's really about solving the global grand challenges. And the way that we think about global grand challenges is in these 12 categories. It's in disaster resilience and in energy and environment and learning. And so when we look for startups to bring into the GSP, we're looking for entrepreneurs and startups that are already having traction in these particular, what we call GGC categories. And so are you working on a startup that is, currently bringing education using technology in an interesting way to people around the world? Or what is your energy startup doing, right? That's creating efficiencies. Same thing with food, maybe in the food supply chain. Now, GSP has been about bringing like-minded startups together to come together in community and learn how to launch new markets and new industries. We also talk a lot in the GSP about how technologies are going to converge to create new markets and industries, and how the world and how to view the world as borderless. Because if you really think about what it takes to launch, or to impact the lives of 1 billion people, or to create a startup that can reach that many people, you really have to think beyond just one country, right? You have to think about several countries in mind. And so we spent a lot of time looking at global trends and talking about how the world, what does the world look like when you consider it as borderless? And that ultimately, moves us into that sort of billion scale thinking.
So let me just take a second, one moment, and talk about when Singularity was first created back in whenever that fateful year was, a decade ago. Ray and I got together, and we're both entrepreneurs. I've started some 22 companies. Ray's lagging at some like 8 companies, though I think his last company, which was acquired by Google, is probably his last one for the moment. And we realized that actually the biggest way to impact a billion people is by creating a successful company that can scale, that adds value to a person's life. And we talked about originally the GSP, which stood for Graduate Studies Program, but got confused with Stanford, and then it became the Global Solutions Program. And it's finally, I love it, love what Monique has done with the Global Startup Program. That's really what it is. We both, Ray and I both think of startups as an art form for impacting the world. What I teach is the world's biggest problems, the world's biggest business opportunities, want to become a billionaire, help a billion people, and that I'm optimistic about the future because there are more and more entrepreneurs finding and solving problems and then having the ability to scale them. And there was a debate early on at the first faculty meeting of SU about should the summer program be one in which we are having the students actually build something and prototype it so it's functional and operational on day one after the program starts, or should the program really be about something theoretical about impacting a billion people in theory? I was like, no. I remember going to the whiteboard and drawing that proverbial exponential growth curve and saying, no, it needs to be both. It needs to be that at the end of this program, you're starting a product that is available, you can sell right now, and that ultimately can impact a billion people. But the first 10 years of the GSP program was, I think, was a series of experiments, and we should always be looking to fail for new reasons. And we had amazing successes. I wouldn't call the GSP program a failure in any way, shape, or form, but we learned what it really takes to create a massive vision, and super excited about what Monique has built. So let's just say that what was GSP by the numbers is about to be blown out of the water. So back to you, Monique.
Yeah, well, it's actually, when I look at the success of GSP, I mean, we've had 186 startups coming out of GSP. Now, this was a program that was meant to bring individuals together to start a new company. And of those, 56 are still operating and in business. And of that 56, they've raised about $462 million, which is pretty incredible. And what I also love about, and what makes GSP so different, is that it's not about launching. It doesn't inspire people to just launch the next product, right? It doesn't inspire people to launch, maybe the next app. It's about actually launching industries. And so the GSP has actually launched the world's first peer-to-peer chartering service. This was done by GetAround back in 2009. So the reason that you and I can share our cars together today, or we have the whole shareable economy, was because of the work that they did back in 2009 as they saw where ultimately vehicles could eventually go. In 2010, we saw Made in Space come out, and they launched the world's first zero gravity 3D printers because they understood that at some point in time we would need to manufacture in space. And so how could we do that? And so they had to create a printer that could print in 3D, but with no gravity to kind of hold the substance down. And so thereby launching the entire 3D manufacturing industry in space. And then, in 2011, we saw the world's first autonomous transportation industry because we had a startup or two people that were inspired to send supplies from one location to another. But they didn't want to do it over roads that were hard to travel because these were medical supplies and they needed to get it quickly to the location. And so they wrote a lot of the policy that now shapes our autonomous drones industry. So thereby launching the entire industry of drone delivery or sending things via drones. In 2014, which is actually the year I was there, we saw CuraSense come out, and they actually made the first pad that was smart, that could actually take period blood and use that for diagnostics. And all of these big ideas came out of GSP because of the way that we understand how technologies are ultimately going to shape the future and where they can go over time. And because we're looking at it through the lens of impact. I mean, I've always loved when Peter says, you want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people. And I've always been curious, Peter, where did that come from for you? Where did that originate, that idea?
It came out of the work I do and out of SU, and it's a realization that, I think one of the biggest leaps that SU allowed for me was the notion that, yeah, of course you can any one of us can create an idea that could scale to 1 billion person impact, that the networks now exist, they're well enough connected, crowdfunding is there, and there's no excuse. There is I remember meeting Chad Hurley, one of the co-founders of YouTube, who started basically YouTube on his credit cards and sold it to Google for $1.6 billion 18 months later. And it's just the velocity of scale that is possible today is extraordinary. And it's about having the right idea and the right mindset. It's not about anything other than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you think about mindset, you know, what is it from your perspective? Because you've been talking about this for years now. What is it that an entrepreneur needs to know or needs to be thinking about to really get that mindset?
Well, I think so I think success comes a function of having uh, a powerful, passionate vision that if you're doing something just to make money, it's an empty driver. And when shit gets hard, you're gonna stop. You really have to be driven by what we call a massively transformative purpose. And that MTP needs to, keep you going through the boundary at 3 a.m. in the morning or waking up early to go and try again. So what is that massively transformative purpose? That's not doing something just because you think it's something your parents or teachers or a great money-making scheme. It's got to connect emotionally to you.
Yeah.
The second thing is not becoming enamored with a technology. There's so many incredibly failed approaches where you have a technology in search of a problem. It's really becoming enamored with the problem space because the technologies are constantly changing, evolving, and so forth. So, Kodak, who invented the digital camera, if they connected with their original purpose was what George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, said is to preserve people's memories, they would have known the digital camera was a cheaper, faster, better way to do that, and they would have continued. But they said, no, we're in the paper and chemicals business. So they forgot what business they were truly in. I think so being driven by an MTP, focusing on the needs of the customer, of the problem space is critically important. And the next thing is having great people in your team. I think, I will trade great people for any piece of technology or any amount of money. Having a great team with you. And that is, we can talk all about how I just did a podcast with my dear friend Dan Sullivan on hiring people. We can talk about in something called exponential wisdom. We can talk more about that later. But and the third thing is being experimentalist and data driven. Ultimately, the most successful companies in the world, Uber, Google, Airbnb, Tesla, are all data driven, founder led experimentalist companies. Founder led because you've got this bold vision that you're willing to convey and be clear about and not give up on. Data driven because it's not your opinion, it's what's the data showing us. And experimentalist in that it's the number of experiments you do. And to quote Jeff Bezos, who said, listen, our success at Uber is a function of our experiments we do per year, per month, per week, per day. And if we do a lot of experiments, we're going to fail. We've got to be tolerant to that failure. So there's a lot wrapped up in those 3 minutes, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah. And, those are a lot of the things that we ultimately talk about in GSP. And so let me take a second just to, tell people kind of what this program is about. So we've broken it up into 2 parts. It used to be a 10-week summer program that happened. And what we've done instead is broken it up and distributed it across countries. So the first 4 weeks are what we call GSP Activate. And a lot of what Peter was just talking about right now is what we deeply get into in the Activate phase. And so we're going to talk about, actually we have a whole problem sprint that happens over the course of 3 days where we take entrepreneurs into, deeply into the problem space. We're having you look at your business and saying, am I a hammer in search of a nail? Or am I really, solving things from the customer level that actually matter? And how does that scale? We look a lot at all the different technologies and the convergence of those technologies to start to map out where the future is going. And so as you're thinking about building your company over time, what technologies can you integrate that'll help you, get there better, faster, cheaper? And then this first 4 weeks is where, we're also doing a lot of leadership and you're doing a lot of collaboration and meeting people, because what ends up happening is your ideas compound around your ideas. And by the end of this 4 weeks, you're coming up with new product ideas, you're coming up with potentially new services, new ways of structuring your business. And so then we give you 4 weeks off. And this is because those first 4 weeks are really intense and we want to get you back into the office and synthesizing all this information with your team. You're going to take a huge leap, you and your co-founder that attend the program. And now we got to get you to galvanize your team and to galvanize resources around some of these new ideas. It's also a great place and great time to go and do some market research or some validation for these new ideas that you're coming up with. And then you'll hop on a plane and come to Singularity University, so into Silicon Valley for what we call GSP Accelerate. And this is where we get heavily into your go-to-market strategies. You know, how are you going to get this new idea or this leveled up idea that you've been working on into market? We start looking a lot at the different global trends. And so what do you need to know about what's happening in China right now in order to successfully do business in China? Or what's happening in Latin America as a potential new market? What are the new trends and changes happening in the US as you start to think about commercializing and expanding into the US? And then we look at this from a trend and borderless perspective. And then this whole thing sits on top of an entire year of, you know, continued support in what we call GSP Connect. And so you're going to have, you know, quarterly virtual meetups with faculty, you know, with Peter, with Ray. You're going to meet with your mentors on a regular basis. You're going to meet, you know, as a cohort. There's going to be opportunities to speak at our different international summits. Next year, we're going to run 25 of them in different locations. So there's expos that you can be a part of. We run a variety of different demo fairs. You're going to get to pitch. You know, you'll meet our investor network of about 263 investors, and continue to really, you know, plug in and refine your new idea. So that's a little bit about how the program works, and I'll keep coming back to it as we want. But what I wanted to do now is you know, Peter, hear from you. I mean, how are you seeing, you know, what are you seeing, how are you seeing the world change?
Well, there's a lot in so many ways. So let me dive into it a little bit. First of all, what we're seeing is an extraordinary connectedness change over the course of the next 3 years. We're going to see the deployment of the 5G network around the world, starting in 2019 into 2020. And if you think about this as every single square kilometer, meter, whatever, is going to be connected back by 10 gigabit connection services from the ground, that's going to be massive, right? So just super low latency, high bandwidth communications. Add on top of that OneWeb 900 satellite constellation funded by Masa-san out of SoftBank, $1.2 billion. Add on top of that 11,000 satellites from Starlink, from SpaceX. So what used to be one of the scarce, super expensive, very difficult element of tech, which was backhaul and connectivity, is just becoming abundant, orders of magnitude, a squanderable abundance of connectivity. Then we're seeing sensors getting cheaper and cheaper, more and more available. Sensors like 200 satellites from Planet Labs overhead imaging the Earth. By 2021, 1.6 million drones airborne over the United States at any one time. Add to that, you know, augmented reality goggles and autonomous cars imaging 700 megabytes per second of data from a single autonomous car. So we're going to enter a world of 1 trillion sensors and ubiquitous, all the data you could possibly want. So it's going to be the questions that you ask more important than anything else. Another big thing that's super exciting for me is the whole spatial web, Web 3.0, where it's not just, how do I put this? It's not just the static web pages or social media. It's the world around you becomes alive, right? We've got Apple cryptically, secretly investing massive amounts of money. And then you've got companies like Magic Leap and Samsung and others that are creating augmented reality capabilities. So it's going to transform retail and advertising and healthcare and gaming, entertainment. It's going to, you know, so I'm clear when I teach about this, every single industry is going to transform this next decade. We create more wealth in the next 10 years than we have in the entire past century. So, and then not to say anything about, you know, the injection of blockchain into industries. Now, here's the realization as an entrepreneur. If you're a large, successful company, it's hard to turn on a dime. It's really difficult to inject new blockchain technologies and augmented reality and AI and develop big, bold, crazy ideas. Your job, typically as a company, is to get to the next quarterly earnings report. And as an entrepreneur, if there's a company doing an amazing job, how do you go and do what they're doing 10 times cheaper, 10 times faster? It's interesting, this past few weeks, we heard Jeff Bezos publicly state what is obvious to a lot of people, but was shocking to the rest of the world, which was, listen, Amazon's eventually going to fail. Hard to believe that, right? But we just saw Sears die after 132 years. Sears was the convergence of the roadway systems, the train systems, the mail office printing to create the 1,000-page Sears catalog. So everything eventually undergoes disruption. And as an entrepreneur, your job is ultimately what I call the 6Ds of digitizing and then dematerializing, demonetizing, and democratizing products and services, and doing it cheaper, faster, and better, creating abundance, creating a better world, solving problems. It's an amazing time to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember your 60s talk from GSP and Extra. I guess I've seen it quite a few more times since. But it's actually, could you maybe go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So if you haven't heard this, the realization, and then obviously I would love when the time is appropriate for us to also answer some of the questions that might be had. But, Ray talks about the digitization of the world, and we are digitizing everything. We're digitizing manufacturing with 3D printing. We've digitized finance. We've digitized biology, medicine. And it turns out that when you digitize something, make it into ones and zeros, ultimately the cost of replicating that something, that product or a service, if it's ones and zeros, is marginally zero, right? And the cost of replicating it and transmitting it is marginally zero as well. So a digital camera is effectively free on your phone. The cost of the digital lens is under $10, and in the early days of the 60s, when you have very doubling of small numbers, it's deceptive. So the first digital camera from Kodak that was created by a guy named Steven Sassoon, it was a 0.01 megapixel camera. And the next year was 0.02, the next year was 0.04 and 0.08. It all looked like zero on the charted line, and it was not impressive to any of the people in the Kodak board or leadership. And then what happened though was that 30 years later, 30 doublings later, now it's 1 billion times better, right? Doubling something 10 times, it's 1,000 times better. Double it 20 times, it's 1 million times. Double it 30 times, it's 1 billion times. And what happened effectively was that we went from a deceptive to a disruption of photography, and it dematerialized, demonetized, and democratized photography. So dematerializations, I don't carry a camera anymore, right? It's now resident on this device. It's demonetized because taking a picture is free. It is, you don't think about it, either do I. And then ultimately democratizing it, everybody on the planet with a smartphone or feature phone has got incredible photography capabilities. Everyone on the planet does. So that's the 6Ds. There's a 7th D that will come out in my next book, Convergence, on delocalization, which is allowing you to be any place you want on the planet anytime, but we'll talk about that later.
That's cool. We had a question come in from Jay Simmons. He says 5G is very interesting. Super curious from hearing from you to hear you speak about it. Could you elaborate?
Sure. So the word G stands for generation, and we had our first 1G generation phones. I had one. I remember having one of those Motorola brick phones. I was doing an MD at Harvard and an MIT engineering graduate degree, and I would be in the hospital in surgery. And I had one of my first companies was a rocket company, and I would jump out of surgery, run to the locker, call on my Motorola phone to find out how the rocket firing did or did not succeed back then. And it was a magical power in that the 2G came along, the 3G phones, we now have 4G and LTE, And it really relates to a couple different elements, the bandwidth, how rapidly you can transmit bits, and latency, how quickly it takes for a bit to get from one location to the other. Your typical 4G phone is operating at 10 to 100 megabits per second. The 5G phones are going to be at 10 gigabits per second. What that means is you're effectively downloading a feature motion picture in under a second. So what are the implications of this is number one, and also they have much lower latency times. The implications are you can take your next LG or Sony or Samsung TV and put it on the wall and plug it in. If it's got a 5G chip, it'll pick up all the channels. So we're going to see a flip from cable operators to the mobile phone operators as being the content providers. It's interesting, right? The future of our VR and AR headsets with 5G means you can cut the cable and you can have the richness of all of the data flowing into your optic nerve from a headset that isn't tethered anymore to something else. And so I think that's massively the notion that we're eventually all going to be dribbling bits, healthcare bits, information bits, bits about where our eye gaze is, the conversations we're having, biomedical information from our body, whatever it might be, over to the network. So we're entering a world of a trillion sensors, 50 billion connected devices with a trillion sensors, where ultimately it's going to be more important the questions you ask as an entrepreneur versus what you actually know. So I'll leave it at that right now.
Great. So somebody asked if I could go over the timeline one more time for GSP and
Monique, I would love to ask you, who is your ideal? Do you apply as a team? Do you apply as an individual? What are the criteria? If you've got are you looking for a sole player or a team of people? Do you have revenue? Let's talk about the entry criteria, then the timeline. My goal here is, we will be oversubscribed, but what I want, honestly, is for those of you watching, the ones who are who will get the most out of this and have the chance to impact the world the greatest. I want you guys and gals to hear this and make sure that that you apply for this program. We get a chance to support you in your global growth.
Right. Yeah. So this is the Global Startup Program. And so it's really for startups that have been in business. And we're looking for a minimum of 2 years. And let me explain why. It's because at the very early idea stage, you're still kind of trying to find some degree of product market fit, and which is fine, but we're looking for companies that are closer to product market fit or have already achieved it. That's so that we can really sort of layer in the network that we have that's available to support that and help you scale. So a lot of what we're doing is looking for entrepreneurs. So if you're 2 years in business, we're looking for a minimum of 2 people that can attend the program. Why 2 people? Because this program moves so fast. And you're going to learn so much and take such a big leapfrog from your team that if you have a really good sparring partner that can keep pace with you, that can continue to help you work on the business, integrate these ideas, collaborate with the team, you're going to have greater success. When you think about who should you bring, is it your co-founder? Is it a colleague? Is it somebody else on your team? You want to find somebody that's very complementary to you, that's gonna, who do you, when you're in a great ideation session, who really levels up your ideas, and who's somebody that can keep pace with you as you're moving very, very quickly. Those are the right 2 people to send to this type of program. And then, we are all about.
What if you wanted to send more, Monique?
Pardon me?
What if you wanted to send more?
Yeah, you can absolutely send more people. You want to send it to your whole entire team of 5? Welcome to have them all. And there'll be opportunities too for larger groups of people to have larger mentoring sessions. And so we can completely support a team of 2 or a team of 5 or a team of more than that.
That's great. And by the way, I just want to add, again, this is what we found. I mean, SU over the last 10 years has attracted incredibly smart people like Monique, case in point. And but the challenge was over the course of the 8 to 10 weeks, call it a 10-week program, we were asking people to, first of all, find a co-founder or a founding team, and that whole chemistry of, sort of like the antibody antigen fit reaction was itself a challenge, right? You have all these alpha males, alpha women competing for my idea versus your idea. And then once they formed a team, coming up with the idea and then prototyping the idea. So it was a lot to do in the pressure cooker of SU. And so we've disintermediated that, or Monique has, into a program that I love. And so if you want to take that to the timeline as the next step, that'd be great.
Yeah. And just to add a little bit, I mean, one of the things that we saw that was the most successful startups that were coming out of GSP actually already were walking in with that idea. And so they had already been cultivating that idea for a lot longer. And we saw as they started to really get their hands around the resources of SU that they were able to move it forward much quicker. So now we focus the program around that. So again, the program breaks up into sort of 3 categories. It's 4 weeks in country, 4 weeks off, 4 weeks in Silicon Valley. But let's look at it tactically. So there's 2 GSP cohorts that'll run next year. The first one starts in April, and it's in Copenhagen, Denmark, at our Singularity University Nordic partner. And so you'll spend 4 weeks in Copenhagen, and then you'll have 4 weeks off, and then you'll get on a plane and come to Silicon Valley for 4 weeks of GSP Accelerate, and then you get 12 months of ongoing support from there. And then the second cohort begins in August, and that one will be in Cape Town, South Africa, at our South African partner location. And then so it's 4 weeks in Cape Town, South Africa, 4 weeks off, and then 4 weeks in Silicon Valley for GSP Accelerate, and then again, another 12 months of ongoing support. And if you're interested in applying, especially if you're thinking about doing it, I would encourage you to do it right away. We've already accepted our first round of early applications. We're doing our second one starting on Friday, and then our final one will be January 15th. So you want to get your application in this week. GSP is one of those programs that always sells out. It gets more applications and has a very low acceptance rate. So I encourage you to apply very, very quickly, and that's at su.org/GSP.
And Monique, how many total people and companies are in this first cohort in Denmark?
Yeah, we're looking for a minimum of 40, and we're maximum of 60. So then that'll be, again, about 2 people, so minimum of 2 people per startup. And then for those startups that want to bring in more, those numbers will go up. Yep. Okay, so we had another great question that came in about, do we take equity? We don't. So we do not take equity in this program. If we decide to invest down the road, we'll take equity and talk about it at that point, but this is a program that does not take equity. There is a fee. It's $30,000 to attend the program, and there are scholarships available. So when you fill out your application, you'll be able to select whether or not you need a scholarship. So somebody was asking me here, Mario, saying many people worldwide are losing jobs and meaning for life as automation takes their work. Could you talk a little bit about that? How our EXOs are creating, actually, just more about that. I think you mentioned at the beginning of this call that you just did a workshop on that.
Sure. So first of all, I want to flip everybody's mindset here. When you hear of a incredibly impactful problem or devastating problem or, challenging problem, I want you to think about a great entrepreneurial opportunity. So I think there are a large number of entrepreneurial startups and that will come out of solving the problem of technological employment. So yeah, we're going to have technological employment for sure. We're going to have a large number of jobs, a lot that are dull, dirty, or dangerous. And then we're going to have those that are coming out and just because AI robotics can do the job better. And I think one of the things that is going to come out of this is that we're going to differentiate 2 different parts. If I ask you, why you work, a lot of people work to earn a living, to put insurance or get health care for their families. And other people work because they love what they do. They want to make an impact. Work to a lot of people is a 4-letter word, but work, we should call, instead of calling it work, we should call making the world a better place, or I'm going to go and transform lives, or I'm going to go and follow my inner passion. Work has this negative connotation, but when you're lucky, it's everything but that. It's what you do because you love doing it. So what if we begin to split working for fulfillment and passion and working for earning a living to be able to afford the things we need, let alone desire in life? And I think that's a lot of what we're going to be going. Ultimately, I think it's going to be around transforming how we spend our time, our free time, our play. There's still a large amount of debate about exponential tech and degrade jobs or increase the number of jobs. And I think the jury is still out. I was pretty clear that it's going to reduce the number of jobs. And I think it will do that in the short term, but I think ultimately the definition of a job is going to change. I think ultimately we're going to partner with technology to do the kinds of things we truly desire to do, but never had a chance to do. So ultimately, guys, it's a big opportunity. What ideas do you have? I mean, I think, and I would love to hear whether it's from policy standpoint, from services standpoint, how would you attack this problem as part of the GSB?
Right, and a lot of the things that you talk about, we talk about in the GSP, are about sort of that 10x thinking. I learned 10x and moonshot thinking from you, and so I'd love to hear, have everybody hear from you. How do you really, ground 10x?
So when I talk about 10x in anything, it really is about agility and willingness to let go. Astro Teller who is now head of X, part of Alphabet, used to be Google X, talks about, if you want to go and increase your business by 10%, you can work harder. You can work Friday night and Saturday night. You can be lucky. You can hire the right person. You can make the right, acquisition. But if you want to go, instead of 10% bigger, you want to go 1,000% bigger, 10x your company, you've got to start with a clean sheet of paper. You've got to start again. And so, the poster child for this is Elon, who didn't go out and buy an aerospace company and to build SpaceX. He started with a clean sheet of paper. He went to first principle thinking and said, okay, what is the potential for a rocket? What could it potentially do if it was reusable? And, and built a system. And he's basically, he could have sat and milked the Falcon 9, especially the Falcon 9 with recoverable first stage boosters and the Falcon Heavy. But he's like, no, I'm going to 10x that and go for, used to be the BFR, now Starship, whatever he's calling it. I'm going to disrupt my own production line right after we have it going and do the next 10x on top of that. And that's, brilliant. You saw the same thing happening with Tesla, where he looked from a first principle thinking of what could lithium-ion batteries do, how cheap could they become? And, he built the Gigafactory, amazing, which is producing more lithium-ion batteries this year, 35 gigawatt hours, than the rest of the world combined. So it's having that level of vision and thought, which is really what allows you to do a 10x. Is it easy? No. Is it hard? Absolutely. Is it risky? You betcha. But that's what it really takes. And this is where traditional companies can't do that, right? When Jeff Bezos said this past week that, Amazon will eventually be disrupted, and he thinks he's got 30 years left in the company, amazing, right? That he's got the forethought and vision and clarity and wisdom to realize that, because it's true. As you get a bigger and bigger company, you become osteophyte. You can't experiment fast enough, and consequently, you get disrupted by some other crazy idea from nanotech or, AGI or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. Christian asks, how will technology transform developing countries? I think this is an important question. And he's specifically looking for farmers. How can farmers benefit from technology? But I know we get this question a lot. What are your thoughts?
So I think that every country has advantages and disadvantages. And developing worlds to a large degree can have the advantage of greenfield operations, meaning that you don't have a set means of operations. The laws still need to be created. You can experiment more. And sometimes it allows you to leapfrog. So for example, Africa, as a perfect example, right, skipped the copper line phone generation, wired phones, and went straight to full-on mobility. And as a result, developed a number of different elements like M-Pesa for digital currencies. I think Africa is going to skip roads. It would cost $1 trillion to build all the roads for Africa. And instead, what if you just went straight to drone carrying capability, where drones are carrying people, drones are carrying food and supplies, and you are effectively becoming the centerpiece for that transport technology, where experiments can take place there that might not in other parts. So yeah, I think another big part of the equation is, I like to say this often, is that the poorest countries in the world are the sunniest countries in the world. And so consequently, they can become net energy exporters. So I'd finally say that those parts of the world that have had the least thus far, the citizens there are all entrepreneurs to survive. And over the next 6 years, between 2019 and 2025, we're going to connect all 8 billion people on this planet. We're going to go from 3.8 billion people at the end of 2017 to 8 billion people connected, right? So we're about to connect 4 billion individuals. And those 4 billion people, mostly from Asia, Africa, different parts of South and Central America, they're all going to want the same basic services that we have, except they're going to want them effectively free, digitally, on your phone, on the blockchain. And the entrepreneurs who provide those services to them will eventually come back to the first world and develop and provide services that are cheaper, faster, better, right? We forget that the first cell phones, when they worked in Manhattan in the 1980s, cost $1 million in a suitcase, and you drop a call every two blocks. They sucked, and they were massively expensive. Today, when the cell phones work incredibly well, they're cheap, and they're available to the poorest kids on the planet. And it's always been that way.
Mm-hmm. Is that, I mean, when you and Ray were thinking about the GSP, back in 2009, and you were looking at it through the global grand challenges, what opportunities, being the best ones for entrepreneurs to focus on? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm seeing a lot of questions now rolling in about what about nonprofit organizations? What about the future of education for emerging markets? So I wonder if we can answer a lot of these with that question.
Yeah, so let's see. I have a personal bias. I've started 5 nonprofits. One of them was Singularity University that we flipped into a for-profit. I probably will not start a nonprofit again. I probably would look at how do I start it as a for-profit and use best business practices. There's some things that should be a nonprofit, but not everything. Just because you're trying to do good for people doesn't mean it has to be a nonprofit. You can do amazingly good for people. Like Google, I would say, is one of the most impactful, positive, impactful companies on the planet as a for-profit. And then the better it does, the more it can impact other people. So ultimately, nonprofit, sure. I think Monique, you're allowing nonprofits in the program, yes?
Yeah, we definitely are.
Yeah, but I would urge you to ask, does it have to be a nonprofit, or could you do it as a for-profit? A lot of restrictions come when you put on a nonprofit. Maybe you could do it as a benefit corporation instead. Listen, I said before, the world's biggest problems, education, food, healthcare, water, energy, all those things are massive business opportunities. And we're heading towards a world in which we're meeting the needs eventually of every man, woman, and child on this planet, uplifting them. So, it's really, can you become an expert in a problem space versus a solution space? The tech is always changing. So how you solve a problem will be different year on year on year. And in becoming enamored with the problem, I think is very important.
Yeah. Yep. So I want to take, we've got about 10 minutes left here, and I wanted to take a little bit more time to talk about some of the details and let people here know what's going to happen next. So if you're interested in applying to GSP, you're going to want to go to su.org/GSP and go ahead and fill out the application. And I know there's a lot of questions specifically around the deep details of what's in the program. What are we going to be doing on a day-to-day basis? And there's going to be another webinar that you're going to be attending once you apply that will get into all of those particulars, and I'll take specific questions around, very, very granular detail about the program. And so, but it is 4 weeks. So it's 8 total weeks in person. It's, you want a minimum of 2 people. This is for startups that, have a business. We're looking for, startups that map into our Global Grand Challenge categories. So we're ultimately looking to support startups that are in education, disaster resilience, those 12 categories that I put up there in the beginning. If you're ready to start looking at scale, you really want to understand what's going on from a technological perspective or a global trends perspective. This is the right type of program for you. The reason that we've started distributing it across the world is because, over time we've discovered that innovation is not Silicon Valley centric. It's happening all over the world, and there's incredible innovation hubs that are emerging and have been there for years and years. And we just want to create the bridges and bridge it back to the Valley, and then connect the nodes and make it easier for entrepreneurs to build global businesses. There is one more question that just popped in. Are you okay to take a couple more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. So what does Peter think about growth by acquisition strategy?
So I think that there's correct ways and poor ways to do it. I think that that if you're a large corporation, it's critically important for you to play with small entrepreneurial teams. And I always say, if you're a leading company, your job is not to get disrupted by all the furry mammals around you in this rapid rate of change. And you, as a large successful company, have assets, brand, cash, customers, and data that are super valuable. And how you share those assets, brand, cash, customers, and data information with entrepreneurs on the periphery of your company is an important strategic plan. And if I were a large company, I would try and find 10 or 20 small startups and take a 20% or 19% non-consolidated position with those, and share my data with them, share customers, share experience, help them grow. And as 20% of them succeed, double down on those again. But I would not buy them. To buy a startup typically is to crush it or kill it. Because if you're a large successful company, your culture and your operation will smother a startup. If you're a startup and growing by acquiring another startup, it depends on your relative sizes, and it depends much more on culture. I mean, a lot of times the reason that you're buying another company, it could be for its patents, it could be for its customers or its data. Those are valid reasons. If you're buying it for the people, sort of an acqui-hire, unless there's a culture matchup, those people are going to leave. I don't care what kind of contract you put them under. So it's really got to be done really well. You don't want to ever hire a company that's rocking it and then crush the life out of the entrepreneurial CEO who doesn't like coming to work anymore.
Yeah, yeah, great. Um, Last question here is what emerging technologies or what exponential technologies do you think have the greatest impact?
Oh, so
Utilize-
I don't know that it's a fair question. It's all of them. It's all of them relative to the problem that they're solving. We're also seeing, we're also seeing convergence of a lot of these technologies. I
Mhm.
mean, there's no question that the granddaddy of it all is AI right now. You know, Sundar at Google said AI is more meaningful to humanity than electricity or fire. He's probably true. He's probably right. Um, and then, eventually it will be nanotechnology. You know, spatial web is going to be super exciting. We're seeing a resurgence this next year or two of AR and VR coming in and transforming retail and education and tourism and all kinds of things. So it's not any one, it's all of them, and it's not any one in on their own. It's the convergences of a dozen of these or two or three of these technologies to be specific, coming together. So this is the most exciting time to be an entrepreneur. It used to be that starting a company was an expensive, difficult process. Today, you can have an idea, you can mock it up, 3D print a, a demo, put it up on a crowdfunding site, and have people buying it by the end of the day. Um, you know, it's the agility and velocity is extraordinary.
Yeah. And are there any technologies or industries for that matter that you're particularly excited about right now?
I am. I mean, I'm spending a lot of my own time in the longevity space, of how do you extend a healthy human lifespan. It's not the easiest of spaces, but it's something that I'm personally excited about. Um, and obviously the education space through Singularity University and Abundance 360 and Abundance Digital, which are my programs that I run under the Singularity University ecosystem right now. So, but I have a venture fund, Bold Capital Partners, that I use to invest in stuff I'm excited with my partners in. So I'll leave it like that. I would urge everybody, listen, I wish the SU Global Startup Program existed when I was an entrepreneur. Um, at the end of the day, this is about putting you in the surroundings of an amazing group of people, right? If you happen to live in downtown San Francisco or Mountain View and you live in this economic entrepreneurial ecosystem, fantastic. If you don't, putting yourself into an ecosystem every day where you're rubbing shoulders with visionary, exponential, abundance-minded individuals who are experts in all kinds of different fields, outside of your own, is the best way to create this mashup between computation, sensors, networks, AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, AR, VR, blockchain, all these technologies coming together. And you're not going to come out of the GSP program unscathed, meaning that your ideas will mature, evolve. You'll find new co-founders. You'll merge companies. You'll come up with new, better ideas. And this is a pressure cooker that your idea comes out stronger and more capable than when you went in. So it's relatively cheap for the fact that there's no equity taken here. And I hope you guys will consider it. And I look forward to meeting all of you.
Yep. Again, that's if you're interested in applying, and I'll stick around and answer questions via typing after this meeting is ended. But the website is www.su.org/GSP. And we'll look forward to reading your applications. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. As always,
Pleasure, Monique.
and
As I've said to you many times, I'm so thankful to have a GSP alum actually running this program, and you've 10x'd its impact potential and the clarity of its thinking, and I'm grateful for you.
oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that, Peter.
Take care,
All right.
guys. Bye, everybody.
All right. See ya.